Hi guys, welcome back to Overtime Heroics MMA. My name is Martin Hampton and I'm joined today by professional undefeated fighter Garry Tonon. How you doing, Garry?
Oh, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I was going to do I usually do a bit when I get people on and I kind of list their accomplishments, but if I was to list all yours, we'd be here to tomorrow. so I just gave you that. I hope that's all right.
Works for me.
Yeah. So for anyone that doesn't know, Garry is also one of the best grapplers to ever step foot in the world. He's won the Eddie Bravo individual 5 times, isn't it? The Invitational, sorry.
Yes, sir. You got it right.
All right. So first things first for the interview, Garry. We'll go back to the beginning. What was it that first drew you to martial arts?
Yeah, man. So I was always very active as a child. I really liked sports and just activities in general. I have ADHD. I was hyperactive, if you will. So I was drawn to doing different things all the time. Like I wanted to be engaged with some type of activity, whatever it was, to kind of expend this energy that I had. And this, it's interesting. Like ADHD, we always look at it as like a lack of ability to focus, but in a way it's you can have like a hyper focus about certain things. And like, it was great to be able to experience activities that I was very motivated to do. I could get very focused on and apply a lot of attention and focus to those activities. Yeah, there'd be times where I'd space out a little bit. There still are when I'm working with John. Every once in a while he teaches a technique, and I look around the room and I'm like, yeah, I don't remember anything that guy just said. But I definitely just gravitated towards activity, just in many different ways. And one of the things I think, just being male, also being in a situation where I had a sister, and at somewhere around age 9, I think my parents got divorced. So it was kind of like my mom and my sister were the main people that I was around. So there really wasn't a lot of, there wasn't a lot of males around. Like it wasn't like a rough and tumble kind of environment. I had a few cousins, but most of them lived a little bit farther away from me. So I didn't really get to spend too much time with them. Maybe a few kids from the neighborhood here and there. So I think I had a lot of like aggressive energy about me as a kid that I didn't really get to, that wasn't allowed to be let out in any other area than sports, So I did things like baseball at first, and baseball was cool, but it was kind of hard to hold my attention because you weren't always doing things. It's kind of like, all right, you make your play, and now there's like going to be a period of pause, and that period of pause would kill me. So even in baseball, like I tried to be I played the catcher position because you're involved in pretty much every play, just constantly, right? So you're always doing something. I wasn't really allowed to do contact sports. My mother wasn't into it. Like I wanted to do like football, and she just wasn't having it. So that was a losing argument for me. I was never able to do that. But my cousins that I was mentioning before did some wrestling. And because they did wrestling, and my mom knew that on some level that it was safe, I guess, because my cousins did it and they hadn't died. I guess she thought that wrestling was okay, and I think she was always encouraging of me to be involved in more activities and things, knowing that I had issues with, attention and issues with socializing and things a little bit more so maybe than the average kid. So I think she always wanted me involved in things, but maybe wasn't as sure about the contact sports. But wrestling, I guess she was able to get behind for whatever reason. And I started doing that. I really liked it. It was very different than some of the other things that I had done. Like I told you before, like you're kind of always actively doing something, specifically when you're actually doing your live training or whatever the case may be. So there's always something to do. There's always something to pay attention to. There's very rarely a break in the action. So it was a very easy sport for me to get acclimated to early. I also said that it just kind of had like a lot of pent up aggressive energy. So it was nice to be able to let that out in kind of a controlled environment where, I'm not hurting somebody by being aggressive, but still able to kind of get that energy out. So I started there. I met a friend that did jiu-jitsu kind of later on. I would say like 4 years after, or 5 years after I started wrestling. I started wrestling sometime around like age 10, 11, something like that. Maybe stopped sometime around age 14, 15. And it was right around that time, sometime around 14, that a friend of mine had been doing jiu-jitsu, and his name is Chris Trout, and he introduced me to doing that martial art. And honestly, he introduced me to pretty much like the modern martial arts world as you know it, because to my knowledge, like I knew of boxing, I knew of like karate and taekwondo and things. Like I participated probably a little bit when I was a kid in like some karate program, but not for very long. Like almost everybody does some sort of, something when they're a kid. And I had no idea jiu-jitsu existed. Just didn't know it was a thing. Until my friend told me that he did it. Even when he told me that he did it, I was skeptical. I'm like, what? You choke people? I'm like, you're 14. I was like, who lets you do that? That's crazy. And I'm like, that can't be real. I'm thinking it's like maybe some WWF shit, or WWE, I guess now. I went to like one of his tournaments, and I was, man, this is the coolest shit ever. I loved it. It was even better than wrestling to me. It's like one step above the idea of like just, getting out there and taking people down and stuff. It's like, oh, now there's submissions and there's strangles and all these cool things. And it took it another step past where I was already, what I was already liking, right, about wrestling. And at first, again, because my mom knew nothing about it, she was not having it. Like super difficult to get her to agree to let me get involved. But eventually she did, and thank God. That's definitely something that changed the course of my life forever. I started at like a smaller school, but eventually found my way to Tom DeBlass's school in Lacey Township. And Tom DeBlass, he was just getting started too. It was a smaller school at first, but he grew very rapidly. And the training program was very professional and regimented and things. And I really felt like I was making rapid improvements. It was very different than, I don't know how things are where you guys are at in terms of like wrestling programs and stuff are concerned. But for us in the States, or I guess I should say on the East Coast, there is a lot of great wrestling out there, but it's kind of hit or miss. Like there's a lot of programs where the American wrestling mentality is just kind of push harder and faster to get a better result. So it's like, hey, we're just going to do double legs over and over and over again. I'm not going to show you how to do them any better. I'm not really going to critique the skill of the double leg or show you like variations of ways to make it work. We're just going to make you do it a whole lot until you get really tired. And then we're going to have you do it some more. And it's like, it was okay at first, but like you kind of reach a certain point and then level off. And then now it's just like, okay, like it kind of became a situation where it's like, let's figure out who's the toughest every day. And that's it. It wasn't about learning. It wasn't about getting better. It wasn't about applying technique so much as it was like just winning via strength and endurance and all of these things. And it's cool. It's good from a toughness perspective, but I didn't feel like I was learning as quickly. And because of that, I kind of got like I plateaued a bit and I wasn't as motivated to continue to do it. So I quit wrestling and just started doing jiu-jitsu full time. And it ended up being a good thing for me, and it was a very different way of doing things. We'd drill the techniques and we'd have time to practice them, and nobody was forcing me to hit 1,000,000 arm bars in a minute or anything like that. It was just kind of like, all right, we're going to work on the technique. We're going to make it better. We're going to practice it. And then when we train, we're going to try to use that technique that we learned. And it was a much better learning environment for me. So I liked it a lot. And it quickly became something that I thought that I might want to do for the rest of my life.
Is that not the argument at the moment? Like, because you were touching on the way wrestling's kind of drilled in America. Is that not the kind of argument about how Dagestan in Russia is starting to take over America in terms of wrestling because of the way they train? But they maybe train 3-4 times a week, but quite relaxed. But it's more about technique rather than like breaking each other's body down every session.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that there's an argument to be made for like an Eastern European wrestling style over an American wrestling style as being more focused on technique and sharpness and stuff like that, as opposed to just raw physicality, endurance, etc. I think it definitely is a more American style of doing things just in general, you know. But you know, having said that, there's exceptions to every rule. I'm sure there's tons of spots out there that are taking a very professional and technical approach. But I would say to paint with broad strokes, yeah, I would agree with that. I think that there's definitely a pretty big technical difference in Eastern European style compared with the American style, and it goes back and forth, man. You know, you get certain athletes that shine. You know, you get like a Jordan Burroughs that comes out and dominates the competition, whether they be Eastern European or whether they be, you know, from the Americas. But yeah, man, I definitely think there's some guys out there that struggle to adapt to international competition that are American style wrestlers because of that. Well, for two reasons, really. They struggle because they have to adapt to a different style, but also because they have to adapt to a completely different type of wrestling. I mean, they've been doing scholastic folk style wrestling for probably most of their life in most cases, and now all of a sudden they got to do freestyle or Greco, which is what the rest of the world practices. The rest of the world doesn't do folk style wrestling. It's a completely different set of rules, it must be tricky when you're getting close to a high level in the wrestling world. So I don't know what that transition is like for those guys, but yeah.
Yeah, because John, your coach John Danaher, he's very pro training 7 days a week, isn't he?
Sure. Yeah, we have a general 7-day a week training regimen where like taking off or, you know, disappearing to go on a vacation or something like that is very frowned upon. You're going to get made fun of. You're going to get attacked. You know, it's definitely not going to be looked at as a good thing to take off. You know, of course, he understands injuries and things like that happen and stuff happens, but that's the kind of training environment that he creates. Is like, hey, man, this is a skill. Skills are perishable. You got to be working on them every day to get them better. And yeah, man, I mean, obviously, we're not trying to murder each other every single day in and out, you know, 24/7. We have some days where we go in a little lighter and some days where we go a little harder, and that's that sort of thing. But yeah, he's a big proponent of just doing whatever it is that you're trying to be the best at. You do a little bit of it every day at least, and not take, because the way he looks at it, like when you take too many breaks, you know, let's say, oh yeah, you may enter a big competition, now you take 2 weeks off, you take a month off. You know, I mean, some of these guys out there that compete do that. It's crazy. Like a lot of the Brazilians, for sure. They'll like they'll go on ADCC. They'll do a camp for ADCC that's like 8 weeks, and then after ADCC camp is over, they disappear to Brazil for a month and a half and don't really train and like go to the beach and shit. And like, I mean, man, some of them are still able to be successful. I don't know if it's the best way to do it, right? It's hard. You can make an argument that you need some rest and some relaxation in life. But I think that John's argument to that would be like, man, when you take yourself out of it that much and for that long, it's like, you know, and your mind isn't even thinking about the sport, you know, you start to lose a little bit. And then you gotta spend 3 weeks just to get back to where you were before. And then, you know, I think his strategy is like, hey, we're constantly building towards something better here. And it's hard to continue to build towards something better if you got to reset every competition. You know what I mean?
That makes a lot of sense, because when you're talking, I'm just imagining the human body like as if it's a car. So if you're to leave your car sitting in your driveway for a month and a half, when you switch it back on, it's no, for a while it's not going to run as good. So then if I get what you're saying there, because then again, when you come back, you're spending 3 weeks, which could be sharpening your skill set just to get fit. Again, if you've been at the beach, you've been eating rubbish, you've been drinking a lot of alcohol. It'll take 3 weeks just to even get fit again, rather than improving your skill set. So I can see why John looks at it as if that's 3 weeks lost.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So he tries to keep a training environment where we're all encouraged to be there as much as possible. And I think it's a good thing overall. Do I think sometimes it's taken a little bit to the extreme? Sure, but you know, I think with all things, you know, you communicate a little bit. You know, hey man, I'm hurt, or hey man, you know, this such and thing is happening. He's an understanding guy. It's not like we're not dealing with a, you know, a total military dictator here. He gets it, man. You know, sometimes you need a day. So,
And there's proof in the pudding, because yous are by far at the moment the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym on the planet. So whatever he's doing, he's doing it right, and you guys are doing it right, and yous are buying into that philosophy, and it seems to be really working for you.
yeah, man, I think it's good, man. I've always liked that type of thing. You know, when I was working with Tom, when I first started training, it was the same thing. You know, he was very encouraging of, you know, doing it full time. And like, you know, I remember there was a couple instances where, you know, because I had told you at the beginning of this interview, I did a whole shit ton of different sports, right? And when I was in high school, at the time when I started doing jiu-jitsu, I was still doing that. Like I was still doing different sports. I was still doing different activities. And there came a certain point where I had to let some of those things go. You know, like I had to say, like, all right, like what's more important to me? Like, or like, hey, like, do I really want to get good at this thing? Or do I just want it to be another thing that I, you know, because there's nothing wrong with that, right? Like, hey man, like if jiu-jitsu is just another thing that you do and you do it as a recreational activity and it's fun for you and it's a hobby, hey, I mean, that's great. I mean, most people in the world that do jiu-jitsu, that's exactly why, you know, that's exactly how they do it. And I think that's totally reasonable. But if you have an aspiration or the potential to become one of the best in the world at something, I mean, hey, I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of narrow your focus on that particular thing as opposed to, you know, doing a whole bunch of other different things or taking a ton of time off or whatever the case may be. I think that's very conducive to being elite. You know, arguably being elite at something is a little bit of a psychosis. You know, I don't think that everybody that is approaching elite in anything that they do is really, it's fully well mentally. I think there's probably a little something wrong. Because there's kind of a sense of hyper perfectionism, right? Like, you know, the average person is okay with like just kind of learning a little bit and having a few good roles and like that sort of thing. And it's like this elite mentality where I want to be the absolute best at what I do, where I'm coming back every day and I'm not just good with just training a little bit. I want to train every day. And like, I'm not just good with that. Like I want to be able to beat everybody in the training room. And not just that, I want to be able to beat everybody that's in my state. And not just that, I want to be able to beat everybody that's in my country. And not just that, I want to be able to beat everybody that's in the world. It's like once you start talking it out verbally, you have to realize like that's kind of insane. Like it's a little crazy to expect that of yourself, in my opinion, right? So I kind of reached a point, and like I said, when I started training with Tom, where I had to start letting certain activities go because I started having a conversation with myself. Well, you know, what is really meaningful to me? You know, like what do I actually want to do with my life? And the answer to that question was being really, really good at jiu-jitsu and martial arts. So I let some of those other activities and things that I was doing go. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I did a lot of singing. I did like choir every year when I was in elementary school all the way through to high school. I did plays and in school drama and things like that. And by the time I was at my senior year, like I pretty much quit everything. You know, like I was doing other things too, other athletics, track, and all these different things. And I stopped doing all of it just for jiu-jitsu because I thought that I had, number one, I had the potential to be very good. And I just wanted to be very good, right? I knew that was where I wanted my life to go. So I think when those two things align and you see potential in yourself or somebody sees potential in you, and it's just something that you decide you want from your life, I think it makes a lot of sense to have that hyper vigilant 24/7 view on like working on your craft. Because if you really do believe what you're saying, which is that you want to be the best in the world at what you do, how could you do anything less, right? Because you know there's somebody else out there that's maximizing their time or trying to maximize their time better, right? So how could you not go through everything that you do in your life and try to make it gravitate in some way towards maximizing your success in what you do, if you truly desire to be elite and you're being honest with yourself about about that. So I kind of had that's been building from a long time ago, even before I met John. But you know, John has definitely reinforced it. So I've always believed that to be a very important thing. And also, you know what? You know, another big reason why it's so important, because I was playing catch up. Like I started this when I was 15, like consistently, right? Like there's kids that have been growing up doing this, and those are the people I'm competing against in the world championships, right? So it's like, you know, man, maybe if you've been doing this shit since birth and you want to practice 4 or 5 times a week, maybe you can get away with it for a while, right? But like me, if I expected to be the best in the world starting at age 15, like, oh, there's a hell of a lot of ground to cover. Same thing's true with my MMA career. I started when I was 26. Didn't really do much striking before that. And it's like, if I really expect to be the best in the world, and I actually believe that, and that's actually what I want to do, well, man, I better be working 7 days a week because somebody else has been doing it since they were a toddler, you know?
So see when you were younger and like your ambition, as you said earlier, was to be the best in the world at jiu-jitsu and then to become the best in the world at martial arts. See as a young man, how do you explain that to people? Like see when you're going through school, you're in your senior year and they're lining up the options of what you want to do as a job, what you want to do as a career, and your family are asking you, how do you tell them and convince them that you want to be the best in the world at jiu-jitsu and for them to buy it?
It's tough, man. It's really tough because, like I said, it's kind of a little bit of a psychosis, man. I don't think most people can't wrap their head around the idea of doing what we do every day. We're doing it for a living and at all. I mean, to be fair, there was a lot that goes into it, right? Like, it's not the same as me saying, hey, I want to be a professional basketball player. Because at least that's kind of a well-known thing that people have been doing for many years that people make a lot of money doing, right? Like the jiu-jitsu world wasn't like that when I started. So I would say that my psychosis was even worse than like somebody who just wants to be a professional basketball player, professional football player, something like. You still got to be pretty crazy to want to do those things. But at least you know that the light at the end of the tunnel is millions of dollars, right? Whereas like in the grappling world, when I first started, that was not true. Like, dude, I don't care if you were like Roger Gracie at the time was probably the absolute best in the world, probably when I first started grappling. Like Roger wasn't making millions. There's no fucking way. Like there's I'm sure he was successful. Don't get me wrong. Like I bet he did okay. Like, I mean, being the best in the world, I'm sure he taught a ton of seminars and made good money and stuff. But like, I highly doubt that he was a millionaire back then. Like nobody was making money for competing. Like all the money that he made would have been from teaching in a school or teaching seminars, right? And eventually, I think he had a little bit of an MMA career too. So, you know, he probably made some money that way. But the point of the matter is that the absolute best in the world at the sport at the time was making an okay living, but not like an amazing living. Whereas, like, you know, when you talk about a sport like football or baseball or football or something like that, it's a little bit easier to wrap your head around because you know for sure that if a person is good enough, that they are going to be able to make a living. But jiu-jitsu, really, like, there was a ton of dudes that probably like won world championships and probably this very day like work a construction job or something like that instead of doing that now, and didn't make really too much money at all, like competing or from jiu-jitsu or even opening a school. You know, there are a lot of failed world champions that open up schools and weren't too successful. So to start your question, it was even harder than just convincing somebody, hey, I want to be a professional athlete. It's like I now have to convince my friends, family, mentors, etc., that not only do I want to be a professional athlete and that's how I'm going to make my living, but I'm going to be a professional athlete in a niche sport where people don't really make that much money, and I'm still going to find a way to make it work, right? And it was a struggle, man. It's really tough. You know, even as I sit here with you now, like I think my most recent ex-girlfriend, I was having a conversation with her, and I was trying trying to help wrap her head around the idea of what it is, why I desire to be the best at what I do. And like, that was a part of how I deduced that I'm a little crazy. Like, it was hard for me to, she couldn't relate to it. Like, she didn't understand. She's just like, okay, so like you win the UFC belt and then what? And then I was like, oh, well, like, you know, then I'm going to coach. And like, I'm going to try to be the best in the world at that. She's like, and then what? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, that's just what I want to do, man. Like, that's how I see it. Like, that's what excites me. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning to do it, man. You know, if in terms, I don't think you worded the question this way, but I'm going to word it this way anyway. In terms of like giving somebody else advice as to what they should do in that scenario, you know, if I was going to talk to somebody else that was going through the same thing, there's not a whole lot you can do, man. Like, most of the people, if you're going to do something like this and you're going to try to be a professional athlete in a niche sport, especially, you're going to have a lot of people that doubt you, like, for sure. And understandably so. Like, to be honest, I can't even blame them. Like, I can't even really get mad at my parents or, you know, people that were friends of mine or anybody that would have doubted me, because chances were I was going to fail. And that's the truth of it. Right. So, man, I mean, you just got to kind of like, you got to have enough, you got to have like almost enough self-confidence, like within yourself, enough self-esteem to just be like, well, even though nobody else is really in my corner on this one, other than maybe like my teammates and my coaches and stuff, I'm just got to run with it. For me, I got to see where this goes. I got to see where the road goes, and I got to try. And I think at the end of the day, in most cases, as long as you do see some potential there, I think that just going out there and giving it a shot is going to be worth it to you in some way, even if you don't get to the point where you hoped you would have got to, you know, because there is limited spots in the elite world of competition, obviously. But it's a hell of a time trying to convince the average person who doesn't do something like this. You know, maybe it would be easier if, for example, my mom was the best painter in the world or something, or the best, you know, guitarist or something. Maybe it would be a little easier to explain. I don't know. Maybe if somebody comes from a household where they have another elite athlete in the family, it's a little easier conversation. But if you're not coming from that environment, it's really hard to get people to understand.
Because that's the thing as well, what you touched on, like football players and like basketball players, and the benefit that they have as well, that if they're really good at what they do, they can then get a scholarship to go to college. So then they've then got a fallback plan as well in case things go wrong. Whereas with like injuries, what have you, whereas in the niche sport of like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you don't get those opportunities. So that must just make things so much harder. Because like my next question's a bit of a two-parter, and it's something that I'm really interested in, because obviously you're a second degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Do you get 2 knives for John? Does John give you 2 knives for getting that? And like the second part of the question, because there's a lot of kind of like misconceptions about the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu like ranks. There's been a lot of conversations that I've seen on Twitter where people think it's just, you just get a black belt, and anyone that gives beyond black belts, the conversation was going down the lines that these guys are like trying to fleece money out of people. And I was like, that just seems totally alien to me, because obviously like some of the best guys in the world are like second degree, third degree black belts. So can you just explain the kind of degrees of black belts a wee bit?
So just to help me understand the question a little bit more. So you touched on a few things. You mentioned different degrees of black belts, and then you mentioned something which I don't know if I fully understood you correctly. You were saying something about money in relationship to the degrees of black belts. What was it that you were drawing the connection to?
This is just like conversations that I've seen on Twitter, and the fair play, the person that said it quickly gets shut down by other people. But they were insinuating that if the coach is like giving you degrees to your belts, that they're kind of try to think of a way to word this.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
To a degree.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. So they use promotions as a monetary instrument. So whether they're trying to make money directly from the promotion or whether they're trying to kind of keep you engaged with the sport through the use of the promotion to make money.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's have this conversation in a few different parts. All right, so first of all, I think I'm technically a second degree black belt now. I don't remember. I think so. Because you kind of lose track of it after a while. Because ultimately, like, once you hit black belt in our sport, it's like just time, right? So it's like, you know, you're a second degree for however many years, then you get your third degree or whatever, and it takes more time for the next degree, and then, you know, so ultimately it's only really a sign of you getting older in a way, right? It's not like I have to make some achievements to get, you know, the stripe, right? So, you know, hopefully if you're doing things correctly, you have been studying and you've been training and you've been actively involved with your martial arts. So hopefully by the time you get your next degree, you at the very least know more than you did the last time, right? Hopefully, but there's no guarantee, right? Technically you could get a degree and I could take completely off from jiu-jitsu and kind of coast and not really do much and get my degree anyway, as long as my coach decided that he was going to give it to me, right? Which I would hope that my coach wouldn't if that was the case, but I'm just saying it is possible, right? So, you know, as far as degrees on black belts are concerned in jiu-jitsu or really in any martial art, I don't know. I would say that the more important thing to look at in terms of a coach would not just be the rank, but, you know, obviously I think competitive accomplishments is something to look at. I think it's important, but it's not the end all be all. For example, John doesn't compete and he's still the best coach in the world, in my opinion. That's definitely one way to prove your worth as a coach for sure. But again, you know, some guys are really great at competing and not great coaches. And then the second thing, it's just, you know, take a class with a person and kind of see like, hey man, does this person do a good job communicating ideas? Do they have a good logical understanding of what it is that they do? Or are they just kind of throwing shit out there? Hey, yeah, do this. Why? I don't know. Just do it. You know, like, and you can kind of ascertain how effective somebody is at coaching in that way. And then I guess the other way to look at it would be like, hey, how many successful people has this person, you know, developed and created, right? And I think Joe Rogan was having this conversation with John, and John was explaining how difficult it is to like, you know, there's so many times when there's a coach that's a really effective coach, but gets maybe in his lifetime a few different athletes that ever achieve, you know, elite level status in whatever it is that they do. But anyway, you could look at that. It's like, hey, you know, this person's produced this number of athletes, right? Now, as far as using degrees or stripes, if we're talking about the lower belts as a monetary instrument or just promotions in general, and as a way to get money from people who are signing up. Well, people are probably most familiar with this in different martial arts. So things like karate, taekwondo, they tend to have a like belt testing that often involves things like katas and certain drills and things that you have to have knowledge of or achieve. And when you show up to this belt testing, you're usually charged a certain amount of money to show up to it for the test, and then a certain amount of money for the promotion, right? Now, in some ways, I see that and I'm like, man, that kind of sucks, right? Like, hey, it's like you're telling me that I deserve a promotion. Like, imagine if you were at work, right? And you've been working really hard and you've been putting your all into your job, and man, you're making a lot of headway and you're achieving a lot of really great things for your company. And it was clear that you're making progress. And then your company sat you down and was like, hey, we'd like to give you a promotion. But in order for us to give you that promotion, we'd also like you to pay X amount more money per month, or like X amount of money, and it's going to cost you this, and we're actually going to decrease your salary. You know, that seems insane, right? To do that in the workplace. So on the one hand, in the martial arts world, I can see how somebody see that and be like, wow, that's fucking ridiculous. Like, I don't do that at my school, for example. I don't charge money for promotions. I don't do belt testing and stuff. Like, it's just subjective. And you just look around and, you know, at a particular student based off of their potential and decide like, hey, this person's worthy of the next promotion or not, right? And if they are, they give them their belt. And if they're not, and they pay their membership regardless. And it doesn't make a difference to me. But I do understand a little bit of why that kind of came into play in the martial arts world, because man, as a business, it's hard to make a living doing martial arts and teaching martial arts. Like, it's very difficult. Like, I mean, your streams of income are limited to, you know, memberships of the people that are attending your school. It's hard sometimes when you attach a high price tag to your membership to get people to sign up, right? So, you know, if I say, hey, it's going to cost you $500 a month to train at my gym, you're probably going to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't think so. But if I charge you $100 a month to train at my gym, and you have to pay for it, you have to pay for a gi and all of your no gi stuff, and every time you get promoted, you have to pay me a certain amount of money, and to enter into the next program, you have to pay me a certain amount of money. Well, now all of a sudden, I'm almost able to recoup that $500 a month that I couldn't initially charge you off the bat. I couldn't just send you a bill for $500 a month. You're like, no, this is crazy. I would never pay that much for this service. And they find a way to make money doing what it is that they do for business in other ways. So it's not as obvious that that's the price tag, right? Is $500 a month. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but you get what I'm saying, right? So from that perspective, I kind of understand, because it is hard, man. Like, you know, people are very, I don't want to use the word stingy. I think they're very unrealistic about what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or martial arts can be worth to a person. And if it's done well and you're being taught well and it's in a good environment, it's worth a lot of money. It really is, in my opinion, you know, and it's hard for people to see that, especially when they've never done it before. So I kind of, while I look at it as a little bit of a dick move for people to use promotions and stripes and things like that to charge people money, I also understand the struggle of a person trying to run a gym and make money doing so. You know, I think that they deserve to make a living, and it's hard sometimes out there to do that, especially now after post-COVID shit. Oh my God, like God knows how many guys will probably put out of business that are going to have a tough time restarting now with their businesses in martial arts. And then the last way to answer this question, because I suppose that they could also be referring to simply just trying to use stripes or promotions as a motivational tool to keep students in the program and to keep them coming back. It's like, hey, if I get promoted once every 3 months, it's exciting. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to come back to train because I keep getting promoted. Like I'm making progress. There's a physical, hey, look, I get to put this piece of colored tape on my belt, and now there's a physical representation of this achievement that I've made, right? Like, it's so much easier to see that physical representation than it is to just self-analyze and look at what you've done and go, oh, am I better than I was last month? And have that be enough of a motivating factor. So that physical piece of paper or tape or whatever is sometimes what certain people need to get the ball, like, to be motivated. And it's an unfortunate truth that those sorts of things do help maintain and retain students over time. What I do at my school is the average recreational guy that trains, I'm probably going to promote at a relatively regular rate. And I'm going to give them all their stripes. And then there are guys that I know that are highly competitive that I'm a little more lackadaisical with their promotions, because I know they can handle it mentally. I know that they can stay engaged with the sport. And I know that they understand that, like, hey, I'm getting better at this over time. And that's what's important, not the belt that's around my waist. So I do it by case basis. You know, I'm still not going to like promote you to black belt if I don't think you deserve it, you know, but I'm much more like, for example, I have students that have had purple belts for, you know, over a year, and they never got a stripe because they're just a highly competitive student. And I know it doesn't mean shit to them. Like, they'll probably never get a stripe, and I'll just give them their brown belt one day, and that's it, you know? And I never need to give them a stripe incentive, you know, because these guys understand the true value of the skills that they're learning, right? But everybody doesn't get that, especially the recreational jiu-jitsu practitioner.
Because you spoke a lot about having your own gym and now starting to teach, because you're still a relatively young guy. You're 29 years old, so you're still learning as well. So how beneficial has it been, what coaching to your own MMA career and your own Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu career? Are you starting to see things now that you maybe didn't see before, and now putting that into your own game?
Yeah, I think it's important for a few different reasons. Me being a coach, like, while I don't believe it's required to be a high-level athlete to also have an ability to coach, I don't think it's required. I think there's a ton of guys that are athletes, and that is their profession, and that's what they do. There's a few different things that I see as an issue. One, now the skills that you have, you can't communicate and pass on to anyone else. If you're not able to coach, that means that whatever skills you have are going to die with you, more than likely. Okay. And there's something about that doesn't sit well with me. It's like, man, I've done all this fucking work to gain these skills and these insights and these details and all these sorts of things. And the idea that only me, I'm the only person that's going to get to use it. All that hard work. It's like, fuck, man, that seems like a waste. Like, it's depressing a little bit, to think like, well, I'm going to have my career, and when it's over, everything that I did doesn't mean anything anymore. Like, we have video of it, I guess. Like, you could argue that, right? But I mean, other than that, it's kind of irrelevant. So it allows you to kind of there's like longevity in it, and there's a certain sense of pride that I take in the idea of passing knowledge on to the next generation. I mean, it's the fundamental thing that has allowed human beings to be successful over time, right? So the reason that we're able to do the things that we're able to do as human beings, and the reason that we're able to reach such technological heights that we've reached, I mean, looking at what we have today versus what we had 100 years ago. The reason that we were able to do that is because of the ability to pass down knowledge from one generation to the next. There's something so special about that. There's something so eternal about the idea that you're able to communicate whatever it is that you've learned to another layperson and have them be able to build off of that and reach a higher point than you reached, right? And yeah, maybe I'm not building cell phones, and I'm not going to make the next technological innovation in that world, and I'm not building Teslas, and I'm not going to be the next person that makes the biggest technological innovation in the electric car. But I believe that there's a value to martial arts and martial arts technique, and I very well may be the reason that somebody else one day, as me being a coach, is going to be able to reach the heights that they were able to reach because of my insights, because of the things that I was able to communicate to that person. So it's very meaningful to me. Now, as far as if it's important to succeeding as an athlete, yes and no. I think it can help. I don't think it's vital. I just think that there's some guys out there that are athletes and they do just fine. They're very exceptional athletes, and even though they don't know how to coach, they're still very successful. But I think it adds a lot of longevity. I think it adds a sense of meaning and purpose, and it allows you to build up the other people around you more so than just train and just make yourself better. Now I can make the people around me better, which is really nice. John said something interesting once. He said that knowledge doesn't win fights, habits do. And I do believe that to be true. I think that knowledge helps in certain cases, in those brief pauses in a fight where you don't know what to you have to figure out a problem and you have a little time to solve it and you have some time to think. Knowledge can help. But there's a lot of periods of time in fighting and in grappling where you don't get a pause, man. There is no pause button. There's very brief moments where you get to think. So most of what you're doing is just based off of what you've been practicing in training, what you've been drilling, what you've been doing over and over again every day. It's not a puzzle that's really being thought about too deeply upstairs. It's just little glimpses of opportunity here and there that are making me make decisions one after another. And it's all kind of pre-programmed, that famous Sun Tzu quote. I think that, I don't know exactly what the quote says, but the idea is basically that the battle is already won or lost before it even started, right? There's a lot of truth in that, I think, especially for martial arts, especially for MMA. I mean, MMA is like, there's very few times where you're going to get a pause there, right? So, yeah, man, I like that I know it. I don't think it's absolutely vital to me as an athlete, but I think that for the feeling of the fulfillment later on in my life when I'm done with my competitive career, I think that coaching is going to be very important. I also think it's very important, because this happens sometimes to people, to understand how to coach. Two things. One, recognizing who is a good coach and who isn't is very difficult if you don't know how to coach also. Okay? So if I meet a coach and I'm not really aware of how to be a good coach, like for example, I don't know how to fix a fucking car. I have very limited knowledge on how to fix cars, right? I can do a few things. I can change the oil. I can change some tires, you know, not much else. I struggled the other day to replace a fucking windshield wiper, dude. I bought like the wrong one, and like it didn't fit in with my car. It's not a hard thing to do, by the way, if anybody's wondering. I just happened to buy the wrong one, and it didn't fit the model of my car, surprisingly. But anyway, if I go to a mechanic, how the fuck should I know whether or not the guy's a good mechanic? If I talk to the guy for an hour, I wouldn't know, no matter what he said. It would be pretty hard for me to know for sure whether or not the guy was good, because I myself don't know anything about fixing cars. It would be hard. I'm not saying it's impossible. You definitely can get glimpses of whether or not someone's a charlatan or not, and it will become clear over time, I think. But it helps a lot to understand, to identify that. So let's say, for example, something happens, a coach of mine dies, you know, God forbid, obviously, you know, or we get estranged, you know, one day John says, Garry Tonon, you're a piece of shit. I never want to work with you again. You know, I now have two options. One, I understand what good coaching is. So as I go to shop around for a new mentor, a new coach, I can then say to myself, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And I can select somebody that's good because I understand what good coaching is. Or the other option, I can attempt to coach myself, which is a hard fucking thing to do. But I could attempt to do it because I understand it. It's pretty hard to coach yourself if you don't understand coaching. You know, if you don't understand the ins and outs of the sports and the whys. I mean, how do you coach yourself? How do you continue to make progress? It's a very difficult thing. And that's actually what most people in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu run into. They get their brown belt. All of a sudden, they're the one teaching the majority of the classes at their gym, or you know, they're no longer, you know, the guy who was originally teaching them is busy running the school and stuff like that. And at the point that they're at, they're more than likely better than whoever they was teaching them. And that person is focused on other things. They got a business to run, etc. And now it's up to this brown belt to figure out how to continue to be competitively successful and to continue to make progress. It's hard. They essentially have to be their own coach in many ways. Most of the time, once people get to brown belt, they just basically find a collection of people to train with that are tough. And then they train with those people every day. And they try to make their innovations that way, but it's hard. There's no real sense of direction. You just have to direct yourself. So to have a great coach is a really, really valuable thing. Saves everybody a lot of time and headache. You know, I don't have to go home now and I can study, and I do study, but I don't have to go home now and study, you know, 40 hours of tape a week, because I got somebody else that's doing it for me and is helping make me better, right?
Because that's one of the things that John seems to excel at. Like, just for listening to people talking about him, like I listened to Gordon Ryan on Joe Rogan, and just some other people, like Joe Rogan talks about him very passionately. And it was as if, see if me and you are having a conversation right now, and I start talking to you about a Scottish Muay Thai fighter, and John overhears that and doesn't know who that man is, he will sit at home and just Google every bit of footage he can on that man, just to kind of, so he knows who he is, and just in case one of his students ever come up against him. That must just be so valuable, just to have such a genius for a coach. But one of my next questions, because I've noticed we haven't really touched much on ONE Championship, sorry. So at ONE Championship, it's in my opinion anyway, the fastest growing MMA promotion in the world, compared to where it was even last year to where it is now. It's just grew arms and legs and absolutely ran. So where do you see ONE Championship in, say, 5 years' time?
Man, one championship. It's so hard to say because, like you said, they are definitely growing rapidly. They've gained a lot of elite level fighters over the years. You know, myself, Eddie Alvarez, DJ, you know, all these guys jumping over there. You know, I mean, hey, even those guys are having a tough time. I mean, thankfully, I'm still undefeated, but you know, DJ just lost one. Eddie's lost a few over there. It just goes to show you how tough the promotion is. I mean, there's ex-UFC champions and guys that have been multiple-time UFC champions that are having a tough time in that organization. So the level of talent is raising. Their footprint is raising. The only downfall right now, I would say, is the COVID situation has set them back a little bit because basically it confined them to only doing events in Singapore now, right? I mean, thankfully we have media and we have an ability to still broadcast and people can still watch the fights and everything like that. But it's been hard for them to do what they were doing previously, which is to bounce around to different countries and spread, you know, that mixed martial arts energy across Asia that they have been doing and they made so much headway doing. So it's been a little bit of a speed bump. I'm looking forward to, you know, an era in the near future where that's possible again. Because that was really exciting. They were picking up steam. They were hosting events in more and more different countries. And it's really cool to be a part of something, a movement like that within Asia, you know, because, you know, I don't know where I would have had the opportunity to travel and to do things like that elsewhere. But yeah, man, I see them continuing to do big things. I haven't seen them slowing down yet. Like I said, this is that little speed bump in the road, the COVID situation, but they found a way to make it work. They're still putting on a lot of events, man. And, you know, I myself am in a little bit of a frustrating situation because I'm waiting for that title shot. And, you know, I think Thon Lee got injured. So I'm kind of waiting on that fight, you know, but they're still putting on a lot of really exciting, great fights. And it's really cool to see, man. I'm really excited to get back out there and, you know, test myself. So I think I see a lot of big things for ONE, but I don't know exactly what, you know, it's hard to tell. I mean, I will say that a lot of things that Chatri said, you know, in the beginning, when I first started with ONE about getting different athletes and things like that, like he was telling me about getting DJ and Sage Northcutt and all these guys. And I was like, yeah, cool, man. And, you know, before you know it, it happened. And, you know, it's I think it's a testament to all the hard work those guys are doing. It's a great organization. It's good stuff.
Yeah, because I'd read something, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that they're looking to branch into the European market now as well and looking to have shows in Europe, which Bellator's had huge success with. Every show at Bellator has put into Europe has been massive, and it seems to be something that the UFC, it's a market that the UFC have kind of, I don't want to say ignored, because obviously they've picked up a lot of great European talent, but they haven't exploited that to the same degree. So I think ONE coming into Europe and putting shows on, there's a huge gap in the market there for them to exploit. And the stuff that they're doing over in America, like being on TNT, getting the likes of DJ, Eddie Alvarez, it's as if the only way for ONE is up. It's amazing to see like someone actually looking to challenge the UFC and just provide like martial arts fans with more content, because that's, as a fan, that's all you want. You want to see the best guy, but the best fights are the best fighters against the best fighters, and it's just great.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. I like that they're doing you know, these different events where they, you know, they have like, it's not just mixed martial arts. They do some really tough Muay Thai fights, which is awesome to see, man. I think Muay Thai is really a really exciting martial art, and it's a little underappreciated in the States, you know. So it's cool. I think they put out, and the cool thing that they do is I think they select a lot of really good, a really specific talent that is very exciting, and you know, to put on these shows with the Muay Thai fighters. So they know that when they host these fights, like there's going to be some really good action-packed stuff. I mean, that's some of my favorite stuff to watch that ONE does, believe it or not, more so than the MMA sometimes. So that's really cool. I like that they branch into different martial arts. They do some grappling shows sometimes. You know, they'll pepper it in. They've never done a pure grappling show, but you get the idea. So it's cool, man. They have a really open-minded view of martial arts and an open-minded appreciation of it. And as far as the competitive aspect, as far as competing with the UFC and Bellator is concerned, man, competition is a good thing. The only thing that I would say is tough sometimes with the different organizations competing with one another. I think it's good from some perspectives. And then on the flip side of things, like you mentioned, guys wanting to see the best go up against the best and that sort of thing. The only thing that's unfortunate about it sometimes is having the multiple organizations tends to prevent certain people from fighting certain people for certain periods of time, right? So you get people lumped into these really long contracts, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, we'd really love to see, so-and-so versus so-and-so. And like, when's the last time we saw a crossover event in MMA? I can't recall it. The closest we've ever came, I guess, was when they traded DJ for
Ben.
Sorry, for Ben. Yeah, for Ben. Yeah, and so then, but it wasn't really, it's not really a crossover. It's just they both guys left the organization, right? It's not really like one guy fighting for one organization fights another guy from another organization. I mean, that kind of stuff would be really cool. I wish they could find a way to work some of that stuff out so that occasionally when you get, because I think that there's, I don't know, it sucks to put the fighters in a situation where, like, in order to fight some particular talent, one of the fighters has to leave the organization that they're working with, and that's a tough thing to do, right? It's not easy. Anybody that's seen a fight contract, they must know. But for those of you fans out there that don't, I mean, leaving a fight contract isn't easy. You see people talk about having problems with it all the time. So, you kind of got to fight it out. And there's a lot of things that you can do, as a promoter to manipulate it so that, like, if you wanted to fight out your contract, they can make that difficult for you, if they sense that you wanted to leave or something. So, but overall, man, I love the idea that organizations are competing with each other. I like, especially like you had mentioned, the fact that they're branching out, like the fact that they're interested in branching out into the European market, American market, all these different things is great. It's something that I had thought about grappling back in the day when Polaris first came on the scene. Most of the tournaments and big professional events were just done in the US. And Polaris came out and we're like, oh no, man, we're going to put out a show in the UK. We're going to do something for the European fans. And I think at the time, Metamoris wanted to sign me in an exclusive deal. That was before grappling really did too much of that. And I was kind of like, man, I don't even think this is good for the sport right now because it's such a small sport. Like, man, I love the idea that I'm going to go, in a month and I'm going to go compete over in the UK. And now, like, I'm in front of a UK audience and I'm building that fan base and that's getting broadcasted to those guys. And it's like, some of their local talent is going to be on and then they're going to see me because they were there to watch their local grappling superstar or whatever the case may be. It's such a great way to spread this sport, right? So yeah, 100%. I love that ONE has plans of branching out and I'm looking forward to them being able to do that in the near future. Hopefully we can get this COVID stuff sorted out so that they can continue to go host events in different countries and things. I would love that. That would be great if we could compete in Europe, man. Ultimately in Europe, I had mentioned branching out there, but I've only really ever been to the UK. I've never been over to any other European countries for the most part. So.
Is that it was in the UK when you grappled John Danaher for the second time, wasn't it?
Yeah, for the second time. That was when I fought Paul Harris as well. So I had some of my best matches with the UK, man.
Yeah. So just the last question, because I was going to ask you about Chung Lee, but you've essentially answered that you're waiting for that fight, and
yeah,
I respect that. So I'm not going to ask if you're looking for any other fight because you've made it clear that he's the man to fight for the title, and that's what we want to see as fans. We want to see Garry Tonon fighting for the title. So at 29-year-old, you're only beginning to hit your prime. So what more should we expect to see from Wolverine?
So yeah, man, I think there's hopefully there's a lot more to expect. I did get in this game fairly late, so it'll be interesting. My physical prime will probably be somewhere in the next few years, right? Will that be the prime of my MMA career? I don't know. Like, is it going to take a little bit more time for me to reach the peak of what I'm capable of, both physically and technically in the cage? I don't know, man. I think I'm making a lot of headway. I think I'm doing really well. I also think that I got some more time on the clock to continue to make innovations and to get better and add new tools to the mix. I think that 29 is we're definitely getting there. We're up there. But I don't think by any means it means that I'm at the end of my career. I think we got a little while to go yet. So, and I haven't taken very much damage in my fights, so that's a good thing. And for longevity purposes. So, man, I look forward to trying to be the absolute best mixed martial artist in the world. You know, I want to be known as the pound for pound, one of the pound for pound best that there ever was. And that'll be my goal. And that's what I'm going to continue to strive to do. And, you know, so long as I think the juice is worth the squeeze and I don't start having fights where I get my face bashed in mercilessly and, you know, I'm barely able to speak afterwards, I think I'll continue to do that. I think I'll continue to fight. The only thing that would stop me would be me making an assessment that, like, you know, I'm taking too much damage and I'd have to walk away for my own physical longevity, because I do want to coach one day. I do want to be able to be mentally healthy enough to do that. So, yeah, so long as the career continues to go on the path that it's gone, man, I think we just see bigger and bigger things. I expect to have the title in my weight class at featherweight, and hopefully I'll be able to move up to lightweight after that and challenge for that title. Give that a shot. You know, maybe not immediately. I'd like to maybe defend the title at featherweight a little bit first, but yeah, man. I mean, those are my aspirations. As far as the next couple fights, I would say Thon Lee's was obviously number one to fight. You know, hopefully win the title there, and then I can't really see a world where Martin Nguyen or Win, or however people want to choose to pronounce it. I'm not sure how he actually pronounced it. I've heard it pronounced a bunch of different ways, but I can't see a world where Martin Nguyen wouldn't be the next guy I'd be fighting after that. You know, so if we're talking short term, that's probably it. You know, long term, I'd love that 70-pound title, or, you know, in the way that one looks at it, the lightweight title. So that'd be the next step, the next big change. So I would hope to be able to achieve those things within the next couple years in ONE Championship.
Because I think what you've got going for you, which I think will be a big bonus anyway, is how late you get into the sport. Because you get into the sport at 15, so you've essentially only been doing it for 14 years. That, as you said earlier, there's guys that've been doing this since they were a toddler, and that pays. Like, every time you roll, every time they wrestle, like, that takes damage on their joints. So you get guys at like 29, like, you haven't even hit your prime yet, and there's guys whose bodies falling to bits by 29, and then you start, as you said earlier, you started striking when you were 26. So the damage to your brain's very limited. Whereas there's guys, by the time they get to 26, they've already developed forms of CTE. So although it might not look like a huge positive at the beginning, like, coming into the sport like quite late on, that could be huge. That could be hugely beneficial for you.
Yeah, it could be an advantage, man. You know, there's pluses and minuses to a lot of these things, man. Yeah. You know, it's really hard to say. I think in the striking world, absolutely. In the grappling world, less so, you know, because I think most guys stay, unless we're talking about like situations like the Meow Brothers where they're letting submissions break their legs every weekend. I think most people in the grappling world take a lot less damage. I mean, there's cumulative damage to your body and your joints and stuff like you had mentioned, but it's very different than the brain damage, you know? And yeah, I think that, you know, especially depending upon the way that you were training, you know, if you've been doing striking martial arts very early on and you've been doing a lot of heavy sparring and taking a lot of hard hits, yeah, then I would definitely say in the long term, I have an advantage over some of those guys for sure. But, you know, we'll see, man. You know, we got a long road to go. And like I said, fighting is a hard sport, is a tough thing. There's so much that can go wrong. So hopefully I'm able to continue to win and continue to be successful. And that's what we're going to keep on striving for.
And us at home, we can't wait to see what the future holds. We can't wait to hit that prime and have those belts, should we say, because as you mentioned, you're not just going for the one. You're wanting two belts, so we can't wait at home to see that and just see the progression in your career. And I thank you a lot just for taking the time to come and chat to us tonight. It's been really appreciative.
Yes, sir. Thank you, man. Thanks for your time, and thanks for having me on the interview, man.
No worries, and thanks for listening at home, guys. If you've liked the interview, like, subscribe. You can get Gary on most social medias.
Yep, I'm mostly active on Instagram. I do a little bit of, I play around a little bit with Twitter, a little bit of short form verbiage there, and I have other social medias as well, but those are probably the ones I'm most active on. If you need to reach out to me for professional purposes, it'd be tononseminar@gmail.com. I run a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu academy in New Jersey. I currently no longer teaching there full time. The head instructor is Chris Sodbanow. It's called Garry Tonon Jiu-Jitsu. We have affiliates all throughout New Jersey, from South Jersey all the way to North Jersey as well. So, hit up our website if you want to check that out. Also I have an apparel company, Cash Chicks Championships, which we do some stuff. So, and I do obviously Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructional DVDs through BJJ Fanatics. So if anybody's looking to check out my stuff, take a look there. Hopefully one day soon, maybe after I win the title, we'll put out some sort of mixed martial arts or striking instructional too. So, there's some hope in the future for some really cool stuff instructional wise, if you want to take a look at some of the stuff that we've been working on.